Jean-Michel. Thank you. And thank you for very important introduction, I think, not just because of what I think for most of us is a unique experience of hearing you singing, but also because you give some background to the Energy Union, but you made the point that this is in the hands of the Commission now. And I don't want to say thank you for that because we're so important or something like that, but if we think about things in just in terms of the way the European Union works, to say it's in the hands of the Commission now is sort of saying, well, the right of initiative sits with us and we have things to put forward. But I'm not sure if I 100% agree with you, because I think if we look at what came out from the European Council yesterday, we will see that that's very important too. And I know for a fact that they really discussed it at the European Council. They genuinely discussed full stops, commas, and the details of their conclusions. Because at the level of heads and states and government, they are trying to shape what happens next. And if there's one thing that you sometimes hear it and you wonder exactly does it mean the subtlety for language when people say this time is different, which is a very dangerous phrase, and a dangerous phrase often suggesting of hubris, but maybe we can look at it in a different way in terms of saying what does it mean to say this time it's different, and think of the Energy Union in that way. What is it that it's saying to us that's different, both about our priorities going forward, but also about the way we go about achieving them. Internally in the Commission, and we'll have some questions no doubt about that and what that means, but also externally with the engagement of stakeholders, with the engagement of member states, with the engagement of regulators and different public authorities. And I think that what was adopted on the 25th of February was not just a one-off and a statement of aren't these good things, but it was in part a recognition of a long-standing need to make movement on a few key areas of energy policy that would deliver real benefits to citizens and to consumers, but also deliver real benefits in terms of how we work together. So, what are we actually trying to achieve with this Energy Union? And I think the document, I'm sure you've all read it, starts off with a vision. I'm not going to go through every one of the visions there, but I don't think either that we can that there are many people out there who oppose them, but I don't think you can also say that they're just say nothing. I think it means something to say that we want to have an integrated continental-wide energy system. Because we can say what that would mean in the alternative, which is a series of national systems. And we know that a series of national systems is possible because we've seen it for a long time. It says that we want to have citizens taking ownership of the energy transition, and that is linked to a lot of work around demand-side participation and details, but that is very much an alternative. There is an alternative to that. There's an alternative of having a model of single large utilities delivering all the energy requirements, meeting perhaps national energy priorities. And on the question of true solidarity and trust, speaking with one voice, I think we do know, and we see from experience now over the last weeks, months and years, that the ability of the European Union to work together in terms of delivering security of supply with the wider sense of security has been challenged on several occasions by the almost inevitable disparate approach that arises when multiple interests are pursued, and even when it comes down to saying not knowing what the alternative interests are. So what I'm trying to start off with saying is that actually yes, the Energy Union is a choice. It didn't have to be in the 10 political priorities of President Juncker. He could have put something else there. It is there. It might not be there in 5 years' time. Hopefully not, because hopefully you'll be on a long way to achieving these. and that the choices that are being made within that, the vision, is a vision where you could articulate alternatives. Having said that, the vision that we have articulated, I think, and from what I have seen, from what I've read, from the meetings I have had with stakeholders, with member state representatives, has been very positively received. But, as I said, each one of the parts of the vision has an alternative, and there are people pushing that alternative to each one of them. So they are 5 dimensions. We'll come to that in a moment. But it'll be important to keep our focus, to remember that it's a package, that it's a package to be delivered over 5+ years, and therefore that it won't be just the Commission working on this over 5+ years, but it will be the Commission working with Member States, working with Parliament, working with stakeholders to deliver a very complex set of interlocking policies. So that's for the start. What are those policies? And then I come to the provocative title, or the meant to be provocative title that the Florence School of Regulation posed. Content or packaging? Well, who thinks packaging is unimportant? Most people, most companies invest an awful lot of money in their packaging. You know, it's important. And actually, when I go back to what I started off with, when we say, what is the packaging here? The packaging is the political priority that's being placed on this. At the very least, that's where we are. Were some of the ideas around before? Yes, but I mean, did they have the necessary push? Was it clear that that's what we'd pursue? Not necessarily. And so a political choice is being made to achieve this. And that's the packaging. And then now we have the content. We're opening the box, or the present. So we've heard an awful lot of the 5 dimensions, even sometimes called pillars at the beginning, and shows how work evolves and thinking evolves. From my point of view, and I was involved in helping prepare this document, and I can say one of the hardest things was decoupling, putting policy areas or ideas under particular dimensions when you were writing. Because of course for the outside world it helps to have this structure of saying we have 5 dimensions, we all know them, let's look at this. So you don't just throw it overboard. But where do things belong? So the very important point, and something very important to remember, is that these absolutely interlock with each other. And some elements could belong in one part or the other. For example, issues around security of supply or infrastructure could belong under security of supply, it could belong under renewables, it could belong under making the market work and delivering the internal market. So as you look at this and as you look at the implementation, you will see that everything works together. That was also reflected in the accompanying annex to the document, which in a relatively rough way tried to tick the boxes and say, what are these policies, these initiatives that we're going to be delivering, which of the dimensions are they addressing? And many of them you have to sort of say, well, we can't just tick all of them for everything. So you have to exercise some judgment. But in no case could you say it doesn't affect anything. And so now I start off with the issue of energy security built based on solidarity and trust. I think, I'm trying to remember, was it in the invitation to this when Jean-Michel sort of said, well, this was all a Polish idea anyway, and it's only about security supply and gas supply and being provocative. And it's true, for many people that's what they thought it was. It is absolutely critical. And the work that's being done in this area is critical, but it's not the be-all and the end-all of the energy union. But let's think about some of the elements that belong here. Well, the issue and what we're dealing with security supply in gas often comes down to this topic, and we can tackle it right on, is what about the IGAs? What about intergovernmental agreements? What are you doing there? With some concern that this is another case of the Commission putting its nose in where it's not wanted, with some concern that this is just creating bureaucracy for its own sake, But let's maybe roll back a bit and think about why is this on the table and what benefits does it deliver? Well, we already have an intergovernmental agreement piece of legislation here that gives the Commission the right to look at the agreements that have been made. But what's the point of looking at something and saying, well, it's too late? This really isn't the best. Actually, we're in breach of European Union law here. This creates problems. I mean, is the point not to try and ensure that the agreements that are reached are already in line with European law? Which what has been agreed by the people who are signing the agreements, or by at least one of the parties that is signing the agreements. And put it another way, do we want to leave member states, some member states exposed when they're in negotiations with third parties? And I think the answer is no. The European Commission can here provide a very strong force behind those negotiations, a clarity. In negotiations, you say, no, we simply cannot do this. I mean, it's a very strong negotiating position to say, I cannot sign this. And so we strengthen the hand of the members of the European Union by doing this. And this doesn't mean that you have to publish, and this is where we talk about the question of transparency. Transparency has two meanings. One is public transparency, and the other is transparency towards your partners. And the publication of information around the gas markets doesn't mean that you have to publish the nth level for your commercial contracts. But that doesn't, just because you don't publish and make everything available, doesn't mean that there is a legitimate position of the Commission or of your partners to understand, to be sure that commercial contracts are not being used to invalidate or to get around European Union law. And as regards the ability of the EU to protect commercial confidentiality, I think that's clear. You do not see leaks from the Commission on competition files. These documents, and very sensitive documents, are held by our colleagues in DG Competition, and they don't go around showing them, not even to their colleagues. I can tell you from my days, and anybody who has worked in DG Enner will tell you of sometimes being quite surprised at what was coming out of DG Comp, because they weren't going to call up and make sure everything worked like that. So, they're the big topics. Of course, the main aim with gas security supply and the security supply area is to ensure that we have a diverse, resilient internal gas market. Somebody's tweeting about this, I think, already. And this diverse and resilient gas market is the alternative to an approach that says, well, let's just negotiate together. Let's have buyers' cartels to complement a seller's cartel. The best way to break up the potential dependence on a single source is to have multiple sources to buy from. Now, does it mean that in an emergency that maybe under limited circumstances something can be done? Yes, and the Commission has undertaken to investigate that. So, you could talk about this forever, but I want to move on. And I want to move on here, and maybe here I want to just focus on one particular point, in part because it's dear to me and I think I've worked on. But when people say there's nothing new here at all, I say, well, actually, if somebody told you they were going to have a new electricity market design, would you say that was new or not? Right. Is it some people going to sit down and with a couple of academics, some here, and going to start from scratch? Clearly not. But there are important steps to be made here and important challenges to address. These are challenges that we know we've been dealing with, issues like capacity mechanisms, but not just. I mean, sometimes you're writing briefings and people are saying, can we give some examples of market divergence and fragmentation? And you're saying, well, we could show something about balancing markets, and stop right there. You know, it's very important. How do you explain balancing markets in a political speech? Well, what you say, and what's clear for it, is that it's part of market design. We're looking at short-term markets, integrating real-time markets, integrating and making sure that long-term markets work. Making sure that the link between the retail and the wholesale market works, which is the key to getting more consumer involvement. Or rather, to be more clear about it, we're not talking about forcing individual consumers to sit in front of Excel sheets trying to work out that now is the time to do something a little bit different and to turn down their washing machine or whatever, but enabling companies to do this for them. And this will be a major and important part. Building on and working with the delivering new infrastructure. And here again, I have to welcome, as the Council did, the agreements between Spain, France and Portugal in terms of infrastructure. That's just one example of lacking infrastructure. Yeah, I think I have to turn these off. I thought they're all turned down. Whoever's tweeting, can you just wait? Anyway, so that's just one part of it. And here the question of regional cooperation will be critical, because it's clear this doesn't start off as one policy for the entirety of Europe. But what you don't want are two things. First of all, regional cooperation itself leading to wider divergence, or people who are, for good reasons of their own, not moving at the first step with the fear that somebody else is trying to gain a first mover advantage on them, trying to shape the outcomes, trying to create facts on the ground that they will just have to comply with. And so there's a very strong role here for the Commission and at the European level to ensure convergence and coherence in what happens at the regional level. Now, energy efficiency. There's an awful lot of legislation to come. We need concrete actions. We are talking as well about having a clear strategy for the first time on heating and cooling. Because how can you speak about energy efficiency without speaking about heating and cooling? The reviews coming on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, on the Energy Efficiency Directive, and this as well, and this is where I say you could put this under the market side. What will happen here? The review, the work that's done on the energy efficiency will be critical to the involvement of the retail side in the markets. Decarbonisation. Sometimes I've heard, oh, this union doesn't actually, it takes the focus away from renewables, it takes the focus away from, well, we all have heard how people with an agenda of their own will argue that you have done nothing to advance decarbonisation or whatever the agenda will be. I think this is quite clearly not the case. First of all, the Energy Union builds very clearly on the 2030 approach that has been agreed at European level. Second of all, we are on track, which is a good thing, to achieve our 20% targets for 2020, particularly in relation to renewable energy. The big question will be, as we move forward and as we see how do we move towards 2030. And there we will be delivering legislation in 2017, and that belongs to the Energy Union package as well. Equally, this Energy Union document, the new approach, which is very clear, and I think is something that should be very broadly welcomed, is that it sees the interaction very strongly between transport and energy, and the integration of the transport and energy systems, and the recognition of how they act upon each other. And so over the next number of years, you will see that the actions that come out of transport that look at that will be very clearly looking also at its effect on decarbonisation, but also how that works with the wider energy system and the energy policies that we have been developing. We are working, as you know, already on the ETS side and delivering action now. On the non-ETS side of decarbonisation, we will come forward with our proposals after Paris. Now, I come to what I think was the most interesting and challenging part of the development of the Energy Union package and the Energy Union strategy. And where, frankly, some people have said, well, what are you delivering here? Well, there's no there. And which I completely disagree. But I can understand where that thought is coming from. Because in the writing of it, it was a lot of effort to try and pull together a lot of disparate actions from across the Commission. I think this area is where there's more Directorates General of the Commission involved than any other. And it's also perhaps, to go back to the beginning, where we can say actually the new working methods of the Commission, the new way of developing policy, is going to really, and has the potential to really deliver benefits in terms of creating a coherent approach that links up the research and innovation strategy that we are developing, the research money that we're spending from Horizon 2020, but also the lots of good work that DG Now Grow does in terms of supporting companies develop process innovation. We have said, in terms of looking at the retail market, that we want to see new and innovative companies coming along. We know that we're developing smart technology across the board. Who's going to deliver this? If it's not going to be consumers with Excel sheets, it's going to have to be companies who do this. And what's more is we know they have to start doing it quickly. So there's a whole world here that has to be delivered on. And that's why we have a policy that we're going to develop a strategy for technological leadership in this area. So to ensure, because we need it now, that European companies can develop the approaches that will allow for the integration of renewables on an even greater scale in the system, that will allow consumers and companies to have energy efficient solutions at home, that will deliver the energy services that you have seen in documents before. And that will require work from, as I said, I don't know how many DGs have something to say on this. So, we've got 5 dimensions with very concrete policies and a lot of things here. And what do people want to talk about? Well, we all work in the Brussels bubble somehow. They say governance. What's the most important thing here? Forget the policies. Let's talk about institutional questions. Actually, the question, what we've been told is the answer is quite an American company's approach. Just do it. Deliver on these things. Now, actually, I'm oversimplifying in some ways when I say that, because, well, even if we look at it, we have committed to having an annual State of the Energy Union report. This is a natural anchor point for looking at governance issues. Second of all, we've committed to having an engagement with stakeholders and member states on developing governance. But the different areas will have their own particular needs in terms of reporting. Different areas will have their own needs in terms of maturity and when things happen. And in terms of knowing what's going to happen when, I'll just point you to some issues that are already there. The Commission, in its agenda planning, puts out roadmaps for its individual policy actions. So if you want to know what's going to happen next on certain policy actions, you will be able to look at the roadmaps which are now being worked on for the individual policies that have been put forward in the annex. That will involve stakeholder consultation. That will involve detailed impact assessment. We will continue to engage with member states and look at that and make assessments of how the internal market is developing, how energy policy is developing in member states. So I think here the main aim is to achieve the outcomes that we have set ourselves, to begin to deliver on our vision for the Energy Union. Or rather, to start delivering our 15 action points. Now, we want to go through each one of those. I'm happy to take questions on any individual one of them. But for now, I'd like to wrap up. It's not about me talking only. I want to hear what Sami, what Jean-Arnold has, now that he's outside the Commission, what Georg has to say, what Jean-Michel has to say, and most importantly, what you have to say and what other people have to say. Because as I said at the beginning, this is a process. It's not just about the Commission. It's a process that's about many other people. Thank you.
Thank you. We are entering the second part of it, so I will retreat as organizer and chair, because I have ideas, but other people have different ideas and equal rights to express. So the debate will be headed by a Financial Times journalist, What this journalist doesn't know is that us intellectuals, we adore Financial Times, at least the European edition of it, because we do not read at all the British edition that we hate. And now the journalist today is Christian Oliver. Christian Oliver is journalist since already 13 years. He's with Financial Times since 5 years. So he's really already a highly professional, and he doesn't need anything more from me. So you have the floor, and you are the boss, Christian.
Right. Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me here. I mean, just as I should make an apology first, because as Tadhg said, indeed there was a lot of discussion over the full stops and the commas of the energy union during the summit last night. So I come sleepless from the summit here. So if I'm not very coherent at times, it'll be a sort of mix of lack of knowledge of subject matter and not having slept. But I suppose the best place to start would be the theme that Tadhg was touching on as well. And as for a naive neophyte arriving at this story of energy union at the beginning of last year, and it started to develop, I was sort of exposed for the first time to these big questions like the energy islands that we find in the European market. So we started to look at some of them. Started to look at France and Spain. And each time you started to look at one of these questions, people would tell you of 30 years of problems, of sort of an inability to connect across the Pyrenees. Again, as Tadhg mentioned, there's been a sort of a political push in that direction now, around the sort of momentum that's being built up by the energy union. But equally, then people will show you to the Baltic. They'll show you to the renewables of southern Italy. They'll point you to the German-Polish border. And I think this is the broad thing I'd like to start with our panel that we have here today. Just to sort of ask them to what extent you think that there is this big political heave now being put around the idea of an energy union, whether it is this idea of packaging or just warming up some things that we've just struggled with for decades, or whether there is something genuinely new now in a sense of momentum. And I think for that, maybe I should start with Georg Zachmann from Bruegel, please.
I think that's the question. Thank you, Christian. For me, the Energy Union project is indeed about political signaling, and in that sense, somewhat packaging. It's about eliciting a political signal by the heads of state that they want, on those 5 dimensions, a bit more of centralization and cede some of their competences to either cooperative regional approaches or to the European level. And this signal has not been very strong yesterday, as I see it. There has been rather welcoming of the energy union, and you can continue to work on that. But we have seen similar statements on the internal market for 20 years. And the situation has not really developed very dynamically there in the direction of convergence. What I see more is divergence. So let me quickly go through the 5 dimensions and give a short note on where I think we will, what the Commission would like to get to and what we are likely to get to. So in terms of the internal market, the internal market has been a lot about short-term price signals, has been about wholesale markets, about balancing intraday, whatever. But at the same time, the long-term price signals in terms of investments have been completely renationalized in the past 10 years. Now, renewables are built up based on national price signals, networks are built up based on national decisions, capacity mechanisms pop up all over Europe. We have now discussions on storage, we have now discussions on decommissioning in some member states of certain types of technology based on national signals. So investment and disinvestment decisions are renationalized, and I do not see a political will currently to reverse this trend and give this to the European market, which was supposed to be the tool. On emissions, which is the second pillar, or decarbonization, there is a brilliant European tool, the emission trading system. Now, yesterday there has been announced by German Energy and Economics Minister Sigmar Gabriel that they now want to do something about coal emissions in Germany because they don't hit their national targets. So they are essentially having a way to, inside the ETS, kill some coal-fired power plants. The allowances will be spread out throughout the European Union. There will be more coal burned in Poland and France and wherever. And the European emissions, nobody cares. So again, sign of divergence. In terms of security, yes, we are talking a lot about solidarity rules now and intergovernmental agreements, transparency. But the real thing about, is it feasible in the European Union if the Russians stop gas supply to Europe, that Saint-Gobain in France stops producing for some days so that the Slovakians don't freeze to death? I think we are not there at all. So, and I don't see in the current proposals anything that would make a shift there, and that's, I think, where the rubber hits the road. On energy efficiency, yes, we have some non-binding European targets, and on innovation, we might have some coordination, but those have always been kind of the weakest parts of European coordination. And for the second round of discussion, I would then like to discuss also a bit why the Commission wants to go more for retail and consumers and buildings, which I think due to subsidiarity might not be the strongest reason.
Sure. I mean, Sami, Andoura, is that too bleak a perspective?
Georg's intervention is an illustration that beyond the energy union impulse, the real work, the real discussion, which will be then detailed, technical, etc., is starting. But two observations. First, before your question, centralization, I would be very careful. I think the energy system is much more centralized than the institutional settings at European level addressing this system. Regarding your question, whether it's old, it's new, I think it's both. Energy at the heart of European integration, a European answer to the energy challenges of the future, was there 60 years ago for the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community, the Euratom Treaty, and so on. So European vision for energy has always been there. It's not new. What has changed drastically is the substance, the energy world itself, both outside EU borders, and the status, the role, the place of the EU is one of declining. That's the reality. And then within the energy system, the shift from, let's say, a more centralized energy system towards what we all want, plead, the consumers, the demand side, etc. It's a tremendous change. We're not there yet. So I would say that in that way, it's both old and new, and it's not a matter of ambition and political ambition. It's a matter of necessity. And finally, just to show, in French we say no one is a prophet in his own country. I just would like to start by saying that it's then a good thing that the Florence School of Regulation is coming in Brussels to discuss energy issues. And on an interesting day, it's the day of the eclipse as well. And it was the day of the European Council itself. The eclipse, everyone wants to see it. You know that it's happening far beyond your world, very on the top level, and the European Council is the same. But you cannot see it. And once you see it, it hurts sometimes. And this is, so the lessons might be that the eclipse is not democratic in a certain way. And what I feel good in this European conclusion is the fact that, of course, the European Council will continue to supervise and to be informed. But now the matter, the work is for the stakeholders themselves and the Energy Council, the ministers and all the stakeholders. But what is good is that the European Commission is back in the driving seat in the energy process.
And Jean-Michel Glachant, were you playing something of the devil's advocate in some of your skepticism about the depths to which the energy union would go?
I was in this room in November 2013 when unexpectedly a big guy at European Commission under condition of anonymity told the following to the regulators and me as from School of Regulation. I'm sorry with you guys, but the energy policy you did know or you know is done. The Berlin Council is done. The 2020 is dead. We have only one strategy at Commission, competitiveness, and we are so pressured by shale gas on the one hand and the cost of renewable on the other that no other strategies than competitiveness can work. I was totally surprised because I'm naive, and I thought, wow, that's a shift. What did we see in 2014? But it has been confirmed by the Council repeatedly that, sorry, but that's the new policy. If you don't like it, move somewhere else, in the US or in China, but Europe is the new Europe. So it explains why I did think, well, energy union will be an empty box, because in this setting, you cannot put anything in. As Tadhg underlines, and also the former speakers, it's not the case. Energy union is a full box. It's even very full. If you knew my manifesto from October, November, I did describe 6 fundamental boxes for energy union policy. And for each, I did give a max, which is something we will never do, but we can think, and a mean, which is what we are going to do, because in this new setting. Okay, out of my 6 boxes, 5 today are at max with the proposal for energy union. Only one is mean. Which one? Retail. On retail, Brofley and Tadhg didn't deny what companies will do. That's what I did call myself mean. All the rest, which is power wholesale, gas market, targets for 2030. You have seen energy efficiency. Energy efficiency has been put away by the Council, but it's coming back by the end of the door, and we should get an energy efficiency push and regulation. Then governance, even governance is questioned because it's visible that this new policy requires a new governance, and in the proposals of Commission, you have seen that, and those could become regional operating entities. It's so operating the flows. And CEER should become a kind of regulator. I don't want to enter into more details, but even of governance, they are pushy. And of course, we know for external energy security. The good question is asked by my young fellows, and they will replace me and Jean-Arnold in the coming decade, if not the coming years. Okay, but it's a commission paper. So what will be done? Tadhg is saying, but look at the Council yesterday. The Council yesterday said, that's a European policy we're entering in. And Martin Schulz said yesterday or 2 days ago, it won't be intergovernmental, it will be communitarian approach, the Parliament will be there. And a few minutes ago, stakeholders are there. But none of this tell us what we will get. We have plenty of even very sound Commission positions, having been unable to fly. If you remember the mergers process, if you remember even property rights, definition of property rights at European level. So I won't say the box is empty, the box is full. I won't say the box is full of secondary things. I will say it is full of hard proposals. I won't say that Commission is alone because it's obvious that Council and Parliament and stakeholders are interested. I will only say that I do not know where we will get at all, and I do not deny to Commission the bravery of having fulfilled the box, opened the box, and pushed it, but I do not know what we will get. That's it.
And Jean-Arnold Vinois.
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm sometimes called EU veteran. So it's good to go. Yes, and a bit backwards. I think that you need to see the dynamism of the European process. And some, of course, will say the lack of dynamism. But if you take energy, everything started in 2007. That is 8 years ago. Think about the first time we had a convergence of ideas of the member states in the field of energy was in March 2007 under Angela Merkel chairing the European Council and clinching a deal on the 2020-20. 2007, we are in 2015. What has been done since 2007? It is the third internal market package. Unbundling was the key word. Johannes Kindler knows that at the time. And we had France and Germany deeply opposed. Look at where we are now with ownership unbundling and TSOs and things like that. So, directive on renewables. I was told that only 4 member states were in favor of renewables 1 month before the March 2007 Council. There was an agreement and the directive on renewables has been agreed under the French presidency, Mr. Sarkozy, at the end of 2008. And ETS has been made. Energy efficiency came later because it was already a subsidiarity issue, but in 2012 there was a directive on energy efficiency. Infrastructure, a domaine réservé, prérogative régalienne, for a long time. I remember the beginning of the trans-European networks. Member states were absolutely opposed 20 years to have any clue of EU in the field of infrastructure, be it energy, transport, telecommunication, nothing. Where are we today? Connecting Europe Facility, 35 billion just to finance infrastructure. So look at the dynamism. And the other dynamism that you are all forgetting all the time, but I don't forget it because I've been in the middle of it. We have gone from 6 member states in 57, 58 to 28 today, and only 30 new in the last 10 years. You know, this is an earthquake. And today the Bulgarian GDP per capita is 1/10 of the Luxembourg one. How do you deal with this discrepancy and this divergence? I think it's a miracle that we are where we are today here discussing the energy union. So we have had all the elements, the ingredients. I would say all the ingredients of an energy policy were there in March 2007. And we have delivered. The Commission has made the proposals, the Council and the Parliament have agreed. The main components, third package, being implemented by NSOE, NSOG, ACER and all the member states. Not perfectly. The Commission has some work to do, infringement and things like that. So, but directive renewables, 14% renewable in the energy mix today. We were at 6-7 in 2007. Look at ETS, of course, is a failure. It may be not the right mechanism, I don't know. We may think about this. But infrastructure regulation 2013, regulation on security of gas supply in 2010. So look at all what has been agreed. So don't say that there was not a kind of convergence on energy policy. But of course, we are not blind and we see the shortcomings. We see that there is still these national interventions. Well, sovereignty on the choice of energy mix. This is in the treaty, Article 194. Taxation of energy. The failure of agreeing an energy taxation directive 1 year ago just to put it in line with the 2020 objectives is a major failure, of course. So I think that is where we come with the energy union. It's a qualitative step to be done. We are going from the ingredients of an energy policy where we've been more or less successful, and we are moving towards something else. Do we want to go further? Do we want to practice the solidarity in reality? Do we want to optimize all what we have already at the European level, be it resources or infrastructures, to have the best cost-effective system? Having the best sun, having the best wind, onshore or offshore, and all these things are really the question we have today. And I think looking at the energy now from the demand side rather than the supply side, because looking at the supply side has just led us in the Madrid Forum, the Florence Forum, the Bratislava Forum, the London Forum, the Berlin Forum, and another forum on infrastructure. I think we need one forum where everybody is discussing the issue, because the stakeholders are very important. And the lobbies also have been very important. But the way the energy policy has been developed was really prone to lobbies. And I think we have to finish that. We have to take another lobby, which is us, the citizens, the consumers. That is where really we need to look at the energy. We are looking at providing the best possible service to the citizens. If you take this point of view, this angle of attack, this red line for your energy union, you will do a lot. And you will go for the energy transition that everybody is now in agreement with, and we will develop the right tools to achieve that. And the internal market is a major tool, and that is where really optimization of resource and infrastructure is. So you have to ensure that the internal market is working really as a level playing field with day ahead, intraday balancing, and the security of electricity supply, which I think is missing at the moment, because that is where you would frame at the European level generation adequacy, the capacity market, reserve maybe, and supply standard for the consumers and the emergency plans and things like that. So that is missing. And that is where, of course, today the member states are just taking national measures which are undermining completely your electricity measure. And we need, of course, to have the right signal for the consumers. The price signals today are not right. We've regulated price in 15 member states. It's nonsense. So you need to take the point of view of the consumer and to regulate it properly. That's the task. And that should be the red line for the energy union. And that is where you may gain the support of the population and also then the political support you need.
And Tadhg O'Brien, I mean, I'm sure you'll concur with a lot of these ideas of the momentum that's been built up, but perhaps you'd like to respond to some of the more immediate questions that Georg had on the internal market and Jean-Michel had on the retail market.
And first of all, I want to start by saying, of course, Jean-Arnold was right, and I can say that even though he's not my director anymore. A lot of work has been done. Someone used there, some after words, an awful lot of work has been done. And then I want to use that as a counterpoint to what Georg was saying, and he was saying, well, short term, long term, and so on and so forth. Well, the first point, and we risk getting into a technical discussion now, but let's skirt around it for a second. Short-term markets are clearly critical, because if you have bad short-term markets, you've got terrible long-term markets. And if you've got terrible long-term markets, you are driving the need for even more intervention than is necessary. So I don't think we should somehow put this and say, oh, everybody's been distracted by getting balancing markets working, or that's not important and this day-ahead stuff is, or we missed the big thing when we're looking at this for renewables or nuclear support or whatever else it is. It's not. It's absolutely critical. Now then this assessment as to when and how intervention might or might not be necessary and how we shape the outcomes that we're looking for comes on top of that. And I think that's clearly what you were saying, is that the long-term market, if we want to shape outcomes that would not necessarily happen without political intervention, and that comes, and that's a very political discussion, and it's correctly a political discussion, and it touches on many different issues. But we can be fairly sure that if we have a badly, poorly functioning short-term markets, the interventions will have even worse effects on what happens on integration, that we will see a further retreat into silos. So what we can do by building the short-term markets, by this technical work that's been done, and now needs to be taken on further, is by making sure that we can have an open and clear discussion about how we achieve our wider energy policy aims, which often won't need intervention, which can be delivered by having renewables fully participating in a market, having a market that they can fully participate on, and then when it is necessary to do something to shape the policies, we can be sure about how much it's costing, what impact it's having, and that it's looked at on a cross-border basis. And without going any more technical than that. I'm very glad that Jean-Michel has seen a full box, or full glass here. But I think he also hit the point, which is somehow what I was going at. This is the start. It's the start of a series of detailed work programs. Of course it can fail. You know, I mean, some people say, failure is not an option, but let's be clear. We wouldn't be taking a risk. It wouldn't be a policy. You wouldn't put anything in the news as going, oh, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. Of course it could. It will require political commitment. That's what this is about. This isn't just a series of implementing, matters that we just go on and that's it, and the thing rolls on. No, this is important work, and it'll be important that the Commission, for its part, is able to be coherent and come out with clear positions that have been touched on across the internal work that makes sense from a competition policy point of view, that makes sense from the wider economic and finance support and economic policy point of view, and makes sense from the energy policies that we're trying to achieve. And that's, some of you are inside the bubble a bit, and that's one of the things that the new framework is trying to achieve. And it would be important that those stakeholders out there know that there is detailed work coming. And they, as I said, look up what's coming in our roadmaps. They talk to people, they understand that.
Sami, you had just a quick point on that one, if you could.
Very well. That the key challenge with for the energy union fighting breaking silos and fragmentation is building the bridge between the recent past European energy policy, where there's a lot of shortcomings that needs to be addressed, good things that needs to be strengthened, and things which were never there that needs to be developed. We're preaching this since 2010, so nothing new there. But the bridge with the world of the future, with the world of today, in fact. And this is the energy union: innovation, trade, social policies, digital energy, etc., etc. And for this, the energy union needs to bring all together. There's a lot of initiatives, technical or not, etc. You cannot develop them separately. Just look at security of electricity supply, market design, regional integration, all this demand-side management, retail markets. We have the impression that these are completely different issues that we need to develop, address with one instrument, one initiative, etc. It's the end of that. We need to have a strategy which is covering all this. And the stakeholders, the governance is as well fragmented from security of electricity supply, market design, etc. These are not the same people talking to the same people, etc. So we need to end with that. And at the same time, and it's also what we've been working hard with Jean-Arnold, building the future. And this we do not have. And the energy union, fixing things, should also launch other things.
Can I just, I mean, shift a little bit from past and future in this to East and West? Because one of the things you encounter quite a lot if you meet the Eastern member states, they have a bit of a difference of priority of what should be involved here. If we look at security questions, when you look at renewable policy, heating and cooling policy, to many people in Western Europe, those are obviously related to security of supply issues in Russia. Less so when you talk to the Eastern members. They say there's more an immediate Russia problem to deal with, and they're viewing, they want something rather different, something rather more immediate out of the package. I just wonder how, at the moment, how do you see that the whichever bodies are going to be dealing with it at the moment, but it's come back to the Commission in a sense now, is going to deal with that tension that to some extent there's all things to all men within this, and there's a different pace of work wanted from the East on some of these questions. Jean-Michel, do you want to start on that one?
Your question is the most difficult since the beginning because I'm not good with European politics and external European politics. I'm really not good. It's most of the time I do not understand it. So what can I say? I can say only one thing, what I said yesterday night or this very morning. As soon as I see Hungary, Czech Republic and Slovakia together united against Poland, I think we won't get a common external policy and we won't get a common external energy security policy. Apart from this, I have nothing else to say because I'm unable to really understand it and to weigh the different factors.
I mean, we can come back to that a little bit later, because I think they do share quite a bit of vision in the Visegrad 4, but it's very much on this idea of the commercial contracts and how much private companies should be overseen is going to be a problem that's going to be coming Tadhg O'Brien's way now. Sami, how are your feelings about the East-West priorities?
With Jean, we started from this assessment. There was still a disbalance in the European Union on the field of energy between East and West. This is clear. From history, geography, geology, economy, everything. Again, the key point for the Energy Union and also the European Commission is to bring all these countries together in the same framework. A way to address it is that, of course, there is an issue of gas. This is an issue of diversification, reliance on certain suppliers, etc. And this is very different from one country to the other. Either you develop an only short-term gas strategy dealing with that, or you develop an overall strategy which brings answers which are not only that. And the European Energy Security Strategy of June 2014 and the Energy Union builds on that. What it says is that, of course, you need to address gas security, diversify, but of course you need also, energy efficiency, renewables are an answer to that issue as well. So in the Energy Union framework, we find different ways to address them. And why, I just want to make this point, another way that energy policy is artificially fragmented. We have the impression that when it's internal issue, it's European. When it's external issue, it's completely national issues. So we have completely fragmented the internal market and the external dimension of this market, as it would be two different worlds. Now, our external suppliers remind us that it's exactly the same one issue that needs to be addressed together. So once we address this internal market, external dimension together, we already give an answer to these Eastern European countries.
Georg?
My first statement would be, and I think it's something that Jean-Michel also said, is the Eastern countries are not kind of one block. They are also having rather different opinions, especially when talking about the Ukraine issue. Poland has a completely different position than, for example, Hungary. And if you talk about Slovakia, they are kind of in between, because on the one hand, they are making 300 million euros a year by transiting Russian gas, and they would like to keep this nice cash flow going. On the other hand, they see the political difficulties. I would frame the question maybe a bit differently, and I think that is a good point of the Energy Union and the European approach, is that it's very often about discussing frameworks. It sounds very kind of complex, abstract, and far away. So discussing how to design markets, how to establish rules, and not going into very concrete projects, because as soon as you go into kind of concrete technologies, concrete projects, you immediately know which member state will be against it and which member state will be for it, and then it will be very difficult to conduct this big horse trading that is essentially necessary to make everybody better off. But if you're starting to discuss on a higher level of frameworks and open the debate to these 5 dimensions, then the chances for success might be substantially higher. And for me, the Energy Union was also to some degree a way to increase kind of the political profile of energy policy a bit away from the ministers of energy in the member states that are deeply into vested interests of their national systems to the heads of state level. So really to level it up by one level, and hoping that then more political compromise becomes possible.
Jean-Arnold?
Yes, well, on the East-West divide, I think that indeed the situation is different, but in my view, the first response is to have the internal market working over there, and we have, of course, the need to have the right interconnections between the various countries, and that is where I would recommend the Commission to be much more proactive in developing regional cooperation between Bulgaria, Romania, Greece, and then also Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Poland, as we did with the Baltics. The BEMIP, Baltic Energy Market Interconnection Plan, was aimed really at the 3 Baltic states to help them, and they've been helped a lot by the Finns, the Poles, and also the Swedes and the Danes on the other side. And this helped a lot, but the Commission spent a lot of time on BEMIP, much more than in any other regional cooperation, because of the sensitivity for the Baltic states. And I think it's exactly the same situation with the East Balkans. And I am very glad to see that a high-level group has been created recently. But this is the way to bring them together. You know, after the crisis of January 2009, Bulgaria was suffering the most, and there was a possibility for Greece to help them, and also for Romania. It did happen with very big difficulties, but at least the lesson was there that there could be done something between these three countries. So we invited them at the time to work together. And it took 5 years for them to gather and to look at their strengths, to see how they could help each other in case of emergency. And you know, Romania has gas domestic production, so they could help. The Greeks, they have an LNG terminal. So if you see just in gas, there is a lot. In electricity, it's the same for a number of countries. They have a variety of sources and things like that. But this is not happening for various reasons. And the Commission has also to look at the structure of the energy sector in these countries. It's state-owned monopolies with a lot of national political interventions and things like that. So look, Bulgaria government fell just because of the electricity price and problem with energy. So I think these areas really are very important. At the same time, it's clear that the old power dominating the region before 90 is still very active. So today you have one country, well, not to quote it, Hungary, is looking at Moscow and saying, well, we prefer to go to Moscow than to Brussels. So there is something to be done there. And this is really a question, I think, of improving the regional cooperation. My experience of regional cooperation in these countries is painful. Also, the regulators were meeting together, but nothing is really happening. So there is a major effort to be done there, and it's then leading to an internal market working with the optimization of resources, but also then the projection of the internal market on the external relation. In other words, to be able to speak with a single message vis-à-vis Russia. Look, that South Stream disaster, because of you have a third country which is dividing our member states and playing one against the other. This is a lack of of energy union. This is just an example where you see the answer, the obvious answer to Russia in this field is to have the European Union speaking united.
Just to
So
follow.
in one word, it's
okay.
cooperation.
Yeah.
Cooperation. No, the missing link is cooperation. You can have everything at European level. If it's always implemented at national level, fragmented, it will never work. And necessarily when it's about real time, it's cooperation.
Yeah. Can I just follow up just one thing first that Jean-Arnold said on who represents the power, in sense that if you take a country like Bulgaria, for many of the people who've come through the energy institutions and the government, Moscow is what they know, Gazprom is what they know, they see it as the real power. Brussels is more abstract, it's a slightly peculiar idea. How do you think the South Stream, the use of the third energy package and regulation played? Because you could read that either as, Brussels has really arrived now, Brussels is a real power, you have to watch how they implement their policy, or it just bred a lot of negativity within the region. How would you read that dynamic in saying, yes, we're here, we're a player, we're a force? How did South Stream play, would you think?
Well, South Stream has been initiated before the crisis of 2009. I think it started in 2007, so the Russians were already concluding bilateral agreements with a number of member states on South Stream. And this was before we had this agreement of 2007 where we wanted to go much more together. So I think this was just a timing issue. And then it was too late, and when the member states realized that they had been played one against each other, they found Brussels as very helpful, and they asked the Commission to act as a coordinator of them. And then, it culminated with a letter of the energy commissioner to the Minister of Energy in Russia at the end of 2013, saying, well, look, on South Stream, we are sorry to say that you are not in line with the EU rules, so if you want to build South Stream in the EU territory, it will not work like that. So what we propose to you is to have an EU-Russia agreement to cover South Stream. So that was December 2013. In January 2014, it was decided to have a working group between Russia and the EU to discuss that. And of course, after the annexion of Crimea in February in March last year, all this went to a stop. But that was the result of, I would say, 6 years of lack of understanding. But I think at the end the member states have understood now, and that's when we see the proposal in the Energy Union to say, let's have a look at the intergovernmental agreement before they are concluded, would help a lot in this process and would be just the logical step. But also look at the whole Poland has been able to renegotiate the status of the Yamal pipeline, which was a joint venture between PGNiG and Gazprom. The Poles asked the EU Commission to help them to negotiate, and finally we got treatment and handling of the Yamal pipeline, which is in line with the third package. So that is, the tariff is set by the regulators. There is no reverse flows, physical and virtual, on the Yamal pipeline. So, which is not still possible in Bulgaria and Romania because there are still a lot of pressure on these sides. So, but you see, we are moving in the right direction. So, but there is, of course, the Energy Union is, as I say, this qualitative step we need just to go for the full power of this union.
Jean-Michel, you had something about cooperation that you wanted to add.
Well, I agree with Sami, but Sami is doing something a bit paradoxical as be spontaneous. Sami is saying, EC, European Commission, can do the best plans, the best C, the better. If member states do not cooperate, it won't work. I roughly agree, because given the institutional frame we are in, we need member states to cooperate. But that's precisely the point I was raising. I'm seeing several member states not cooperating on this or that. Even if I do congratulate UK for changing its mind about the use of interconnector. Now the UK government is saying, that's right, the interconnector has the right to enter into our own national security of supply. Congrats, but it's rather an exception than a rule, so I do not see how it will work. But Sami, being younger than me, will explain me how seeing it working.
There's a very good example in recent history where it shows that it can work. It's the regulation of 2010 for gas supply. Before the crisis, there was nothing, disruptions, and we realized that European national countries alone were weak, and the gas was there, but it could not flow from one country to the others, from very basic reasons: reverse flow, lack of coordination, cooperation, etc. And then an initiative was taken to adopt a European regulation. The first reaction from the sector was, you're going to re-regulate the whole sector. This is against the principle of liberalization, etc. No. Having a regulation is not about re-regulating the sector. It's offering a European framework, some harmonization of certain aspects, and then it's opening, and sometimes you can even strongly invite, or you can even force some countries to either coordinate or cooperate. These two things are totally different, but what we get was coordination. So they have to coordinate their plans as a preventive and also if a crisis occurs. And they have to do it at regional level. If you do it, so this worked, and then what we call this solidarity, which everyone says, it's a very abstract principle, what is this? No, it's a reality. And the reality is that it was the private operators themselves who were delivering this factual solidarity. But this was possible because there was a European framework allowing it. In the field of electricity, we have nothing comparable. We have a directive of 2004-2005 which says to the countries what they should do within their borders. It's a kind of checklist. But then it doesn't open any cooperation and coordination. So if at the European level you don't at least have the impulsion, and then of course you have, so far it's changed because now you have CEER, you have the ENSO-E, so the governance is somewhere ready, but it needs the vision and the sign. Guys, you need to cooperate. And then, of course, the way that they will articulate it, whether it's through regional initiatives, whether it's through more ad hoc voluntary, like pentalateral, etc. We believe that when it's totally voluntary and ad hoc, it can stop like this. And when it's like this, when you have a crisis, it can put you in a very difficult position if everything stops because, voluntary, they have decided not to cooperate. So there are concretely things to do, and there are past experience that can inspire, and BEMIP is another one. We can discuss it concretely.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Tadhg O'Brien, I mean, quite a few ideas there. Just to come back to the original and the sort of, the commission fitting in there. I mean, at times it is felt that sometimes particularly Poland, will try and use the ETS as something of a hostage as well in the policy making. That this idea of the climate policy is something we have to grin and bear, and we want certain presents out of the package ourselves. I mean, how do you regard that tension playing out over the next 5 years or so?
I thought maybe we'd move the conversation nicely on from your east and west at the beginning, that I wouldn't be asked quite that. But I just want to actually, maybe we can start off exactly where you finished and said, what about Poland and hostages? Okay. In the country I grew up in, I heard all the time that people, I grew up in the country in the west of it, said, oh, they don't understand us in the capital. And the ones in the south, they're different either. They all had different interests. So let's not start and think that this is something terrible, that people in different parts of the European Union approach a question from a different perspective. That's not a bad thing. And as people have said here, the energy union with 5 dimensions allows you to look at a set of interrelated problems from different angles and to come up with solutions that help in each and every one of them. So just on the very simple one, in terms of gas security supply, you say, well, this is today's issue. Okay, but one of the critical solutions is getting the internal market in gas working in a better way. And so ensuring, and we've seen the slides and the figures, that if you look at the different gas crises where markets were more or less working, things more or less worked out. Second of all, in terms of having plans, having a plan is a good thing, because when you get into a crisis, the first thing you do is say, what am I supposed to do next? And I don't think most people go around and say, well, no, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to stiff my neighbour. Well, why? Because it's been worked out. So the ex-ante coordination is just about helping them, making sure that people know what happens when. We talked about this in the electricity sector. I mean, there are a certain amount of challenges there, but I mean, we have to be careful about how we put it. In many respects, the electricity sector is further advanced in terms of the actual day-to-day cooperation of transmission system operators, and they know when they do it. But there's a whole set of areas now where they don't have plans because they're new problems. So the challenge we have now is to come up with new problems. And then I want to slightly challenge the issue that you put and said, well, what about these new member states? You can't trust them. I'm paraphrasing that. All they care about is this Russian things. They're stuck in the past. Well, first of all, I don't think it's true. And second of all, I think, well, of course you're going to worry about the pressing problem first. But when you develop solutions to your pressing problems and with your neighbours, you'll also look at things, and I think anybody who says that there aren't significant energy efficiency gains to be made in eastern member states will quickly find out that's not true, and they will see that as they look through it, and that's the process allows that to be identified. There are many things, and we can, to use an Americanism, we can walk and chew gum here. We can do both things at once. Now, in terms of, you're talking about cooperation, now we say, this is what we talk about, creating a framework for regional cooperation to happen. That can be done. That's part of what is set out in our project in our program for the Energy Union. That will allow that to happen, but also allow it to happen in a way that, as I said earlier, that people can have confidence that what's happening and where across the European Union, that it's not somebody else trying to shape the game to their own advantage. But I think it's clear, as Jean-Arnold mentioned, the new forum, new coordination framework that we have in southeastern Europe is a good thing and something to be strongly welcomed, just as much as the pentrilateral is a good thing.
I'd like to just finish off on gas, if I could, and then we'll go on to one of the other subjects. I mean, one of the things that I ended up working a lot a year ago about was the potential for bringing LNG into the European market and the opening up of the terminals in Świnoujście and Klaipėda. At the time, it just looked like this wasn't going to be a big factor in Europe in the immediate future. The prices were too high. The shipments were going to Korea and Japan. The pricing seems to be changing quite dramatically. many of the member states have found the importance of having these terminals as leverage in price negotiations. Could you just, Georg, could you start off just giving me your picture of what sort of role you see LNG playing over the next 5 years or so in the European picture?
It's always difficult getting question on individual technologies as an economist, but as my vision of LNG typically is one of an insurance. It's more like a backup that you can draw on in case something happens, and this something that could happen has become much more concrete than 2 years ago. Or than 2 years ago. So therefore, I think member states and companies understand much better what LNG infrastructure could be good for. So price negotiations and having a backup in case you don't get deliveries. In terms of outlook, it's difficult to tell because yes, we are potentially facing an LNG glut in 2016, 2020. You might see declining prices, but on the other hand, the rest of the market is also dynamically reacting to that. So whether the share of LNG in the European fuel mix will increase or decrease is not for me to tell.
Sami?
Yes. Again, LNG is a very good thing, but it shows how in the past it has developed in silo and how the energy union can address it. And there is in the paper Energy Union the ambition to have an LNG strategy. Don't develop an energy strategy disconnected from first internal gas market, and second, of course, consumption, and third, disconnecting from other projects which are pipelines and not LNG. The lessons. If you look at diversification strategy since 2006-07, the Southern Gas Corridor, the real diversification in terms of suppliers and transit routes that occurred was LNG, no pipelines. So everyone invested in LNG, a lot of capacities, especially in certain countries, Spain, etc., without looking at infrastructures and without looking at the integration of the internal market. So today we have capacities which are used for a quarter of their potential, what at the same time we have countries who are missing gas within their national borders. So this is something which is quite striking. And the other thing, so please connect this LNG strategy with internal market and with all internal and external dimension of this market. On this external dimension of this market, you question the Southern Gas Corridor, South Stream, etc. What is striking me is that at the origin, this was a European project called Nabucco, Naive, etc., etc., with European companies involved. Today, what we see is additional capacities of gas coming from Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan is controlling the supply, the transit, and very soon the distribution within the European Union. No single European company involved. So, of course, it's not about member states, it's about the business, the private sectors to manage the security of the supply. No European company. And South Stream, you had European companies, and tomorrow it will be a Russian-Turkish project without European companies involved. So this is some lessons that we should all think about now that we have a few years of experience.
Yeah, so cool.
I would like to disappoint you and half of the audience and all the panelists. I'm totally unable to foresee, I'm totally unable to make any analysis. I discuss with people to get ideas, and I was in Latin America 2 days ago. I did discuss with the guy being the shale gas professor in Houston, Texas, and another guy being advisor of the Brazilian government for LNG. None of them can tell me what is going to happen in the LNG market. And both of them did tell me that in the 5 past years, they made terrible mistakes into forecasting. So I will retreat. I will say, Margot, you are there. Jan Ingversen, you are there. Tell me what LNG is becoming, and in 5 years' time, I will tell you how wrong you are.
Georg.
Just a follow-up on Sami's point, because I think that's precisely the point. It's not just LNG, it's the entire system of gas consumption and production and beyond of energy production and consumption. In somewhat holistic way needs to be looked at. The question I'm asking myself is it the market or is it the government that should provide for that? And that's maybe a question to be really also addressed to the Commission at this point of discussing energy union, because yes, we can go there and incentivize new LNG terminals. I think tools are available with Connecting Europe facility and what have you. And you can put more money on that. You can build additional pipelines with government grants, Southern Gas Corridor and what have you. Or you can say, well, we have a rather clearly defined product. We have a rather clearly defined problem. The problem is, as soon as there is a cheap supplier, everybody goes there and buys cheap. And if there is some problem with it and it's blackmailing all of us, then we are in trouble. So we need some reserve supplies. We need some insurance, but nobody is willing to provide this insurance because there is no market for this insurance. So let's create a market for this insurance. Let's say there is... Every supplier in Europe has the obligation to make sure that 20% of the capacity he has somewhere, either in storage or in additional contracts or in LNG terminal capacity or what have you. And then we trade those things, and maybe it's becoming pretty cheap to do so. Or we do it the good old national way. We just go there and the member states build the pipelines. But then you can somewhat forget about the gas market, because if the state is providing all that, then no private investor will come and do anything there because there's simply no money to be made anymore.
Jean-Arnold, I mean, on the role of the state.
Well, I think that's... I want to remind you what I said about the attitude of the member states vis-à-vis infrastructure to be looked at from the European perspective. And it took 20 years to develop it. So I think that it is really for the internal market to optimize the infrastructures we have, and I think that's really the key question. And today, who are the tools to achieve that? I think to a large extent is the 10-year network development plan to be prepared by the TSOs on the transmission system. And I think in the field of gas, we need to include in all this storage and LNG terminal, and we need to ensure that they are well connected and that they may work in a coordinated way when needed. So I think that when we are talking about LNG strategy, I think the issue is first of all to ensure that all these infrastructures are able to contribute to the well functioning of the internal market. That would be, in my view, the only thing which is important. Otherwise, you will go to stranded assets. And to respond to your question, clearly the member states have always considered the infrastructure as their territory. So even if you have the TSO who are managing the infrastructure and who are promoting the infrastructures, the last word is for the member states. So it is the member states which is approving the plans for infrastructure. So that's a reality. In other words, this is a matter for the member states to be fully involved in the identification of the infrastructures which are needed. And I think the regulation on infrastructure of 2013 is doing that, because by setting regional groups which are made of the member states administration, of the TSO, of the regulators who are setting the tariff for the return on infrastructure, is the right way to ensure that once these three agree on the need for an infrastructure, you are close to what is needed for the market. But that's something to be checked, and to avoid there are stranded assets, because you see some LNG terminal have been decided just purely on the basis of security of supply. In the Baltics, the Klaipėda one has been done by the Lithuanians, where we were trying to promote a regional terminal, which is not yet there. So, but they went, and they have a negotiation in 2015 with Gazprom to renew their gas agreement. The fact that they have now an infrastructure which is allowing them to get alternative supply is giving them, of course, a strong position in the negotiation with Gazprom. So that's the reality. So the Lithuanians have done it on the basis of their energy independence. But
Yeah.
I think that again is just because we were not yet in the energy union, so we could have done better probably. But okay, it's something which is work in progress, and I am not pessimistic. I think we are always going in the right direction. But no, it's time to get this additional step of quality, which will be leading to cost effectiveness. Because up to now, probably we may see, but you know, we come from nowhere. If you think the Trans-European Network for Energy in 2006, the decision was a compilation of all the national plans of the member states, and we had 500 or 600. Look today at how many of these projects have been completed. Many were just abandoned because there was a change of government and sponsors and things like that. So today in the infrastructure, we have now, with the regulation and infrastructure, a process to identify the projects which are of common interest, and we will have cost analysis, we will have cross-border cost allocation and things like that. So all the tools are there to do the infrastructure we really need, and I think that has to be fully implemented.
And on that tools and the speed, I mean, Klaipeda, which you mentioned, I think was one of the fastest ever recipients of state aid clearance from DG Comp as well. So I mean, on that, Tadhg O'Brien, I mean, sort of the role of the states and the Commission working together at speed on those projects.
And just a small correction, it's the Commission that gives state aid clearance, not DG Comp.
Oh, okay.
DG Comp proposes, but the Commission but I think actually it's worth pointing out at the end that is true, that it is the college that makes the decision. So we started off here, and I'm trying to trace back what in my now mess of a series of notes, where this started, and it was about what's going to happen with LNG, and basically Jean-Michel said something around the lines, prediction is very hard, particularly about the future, and which brought me to another thing which is true. And the second thing that it makes me think, well, if this is all easy, we wouldn't be here. The whole series of things that we're doing now, it's not like that we can simply go to the library and get a textbook, energy economics, and there's the answer, we just have to implement it. I mean, have all investment decisions in the past been fully rational? Probably not. Some of those mistakes have been made by individual investors who have lost their shirt, and some of those mistakes have been made by sponsoring member states, either through direct or indirect support. Have there been benefits even to ones that you look back and say maybe it wasn't the best solution? I think the answer is yes. Nothing is completely wasted in this situation, but, and I think, and this is where echoing what Jean-Michel said, if we look forward, there are ways to ensure that we get a better approach at a regional level and at a European level. I mean, I think the work that has been done in the 10-year network development plans, if you read through it, it looks very carefully at what might be happening in terms of individual projects for LNG or for storage. On top of that, I think there's another important point that we have to remember, which is that with the energy union, the aim also is that the strategies and the individual components of it that we see set out in the LNG strategy is set out as one of the outcomes in the roadmap in the annex at the end. It doesn't happen by itself. It won't happen by itself. I mean, at the very least, it's going to be the same people signing off on it. And the aim, and the very strong aim of this, is to ensure that we have a coherent approach from the beginning. The LNG strategy is part of a heading, and forgive me if I get it slightly wrong, it comes under a heading of building a resilient and diverse energy market, gas market. And so it has to be seen as fundamentally as belonging critically and centrally to that. It doesn't stand by itself. Now, we could call everything a strategy and this a policy document or that, but that's not the point. The point is that they are going to be thought of together, the same people probably working on it and the same people signing off on it, and coming to an internal process inside the Commission that signs off and puts these forward. The hope is that we can get that to be implemented and to be seen and to drive and help drive investment decisions in regions, in member states, and across Europe.
I won't actually make that the last gas question, because I was just thinking with yesterday and the what we were discussing about the notion of transparency came together what in many ways just seems to be the starting gun of what could be quite a long discussion process of what this really means. What does transparency in this market mean? We've got some ideas floating out there of voluntary aggregated demand, clubbing together to buy bigger volumes. To what extent the Commission plays a role. I mean, you mentioned the intergovernmental agreement. Certainly, Mr. Tusk would like to see that go a bit deeper. He would like to see that go into the idea of commercial private contracts as well. I mean, your feelings really on how this can change the landscape of the way we buy our gas over the next few years. Maybe Jean-Arnold, you said earlier that you had some experience of like the Turkmen contracts where they would seek to buy in large aggregated volumes. I mean, say is that something that can work here as well?
Well, precisely, I think the whole idea of purchasing mechanism comes from the Caspian Development Corporation, which is something the Commission was working on since 2007, 2008. So it led to a lot of ideas, and not least from the Jacques Delors Institute in 2010 with a common purchasing mechanism, which then was translated in French to Centrale d'achat européenne for gas. I think Mr. Tusk came back with the idea in April last year, and personally, I think it's a bad idea, except in the case of Turkmenistan or a similar supplier, because the Turkmen situation is very simple. They say, we are ready to sell to the EU 30 billion cubic meter a year, and you take it on the shore of the Caspian Sea, you build the Trans-Caspian pipeline and the further pipeline and so on. So, and you know, I have explained to the Turkmens, EU is not China. We are working with different economy in our system. It's companies, commercial companies, which are taking the risk of the purchase of gas, and the risk they take is also enabling the financing of the infrastructure. You know, we went even with the World Bank and all the bankers to explain to the Turkmens how is this working. But so they have maintained that, and that's why we have said, well, what do you think if you have a single purchaser and things like that with an aggregation mechanism and so on? So the studies which have been made by CEER, by the way, for the Commission are public and are published on the website, so you may see all what are the conditions for having this properly done. So this is a very specific case where we would like to have more Caspian Sea gas, definitely, but where we are not China, and we cannot decide just to buy and guarantee and build the pipeline as the Chinese did. So that's it. But the model in which we are working is an internal market. So, and the single market is based on the freedom of all the gas companies to source the gas where they get the best price. So there is competition between the gas companies inside the EU to supply the consumers and to source the gas where it's the best. And to a large extent, this has worked because the diversification of gas supply in the EU has tremendously changed since 2000. So, you know, in 2000, 50% of the exports, of the imports of gas to the EU were coming from Russia. Today is 30%. So it is showing that the diversification policy, which has been led by all the member states, is working. So, and we have now implemented a lot of rules in the internal markets where we have gas-to-gas competition. So any gas coming into the EU is European gas and has the ability to flow everywhere. That's the result of the unbundling and the removal of the destination clause and so on. So I think that's what we can do best for the consumer. So I think that Maybe in some case you may say, but at a more local level, well, you know, the common purchasing exists for municipalities in France, so and they are buying their gas together. Well, in Belgium, the Consumer Association is organizing common purchasing of electricity, and 200,000 consumers are asking the Consumer Association to auction for the best price. So I think that's something you see, and if it is to source gas from Russia with a centralization of the contract supervised by the Commission or an EU institution, I don't believe this is a good idea. So, yeah.
Sami.
I just want to complement this because that's really the key point. We can buy gas together within the European Union. The internal market allows it, where it's free competition, the internal market allows it. But we cannot do it outside the EU borders, because then it would be a very big issue of competition, etc. This doesn't make sense. Japanese can do it. Japanese companies are buying gas together to external suppliers. But in Europe we cannot do it. And what's funny is that sometimes there is a demand from the suppliers themselves to do it. Sometimes there is a demand from some companies or countries, etc., to do it. But then we are discussing a single buyer. It's interesting because we are discussing something that no one wants and that no one has never proposed. How can you explain that?
Tadhg O'Brien.
Mind what you said? We're discussing something that nobody's proposed.
A single buyer.
No, I mean, I think I just wanted to say, as you said on one thing. Okay, I presume that the buyers' collectives have looked, if they think it's in breach of competition law, I presume they've talked to some good competition lawyers and have come to the conclusion that it is. If they haven't, that's a different thing. But it's a matter for them in the first instance to assess whether the ideas they have would be in breach of competition law. If they don't even have the idea, again you ask yourself, well, what exactly are we proposing? And that comes down to, so this is just one aspect of the thing, and I mentioned it in my presentation. If there are specific circumstances where something like this can make sense, in emergencies or to deal with emergencies, then that can be looked at, and that is something the Commission will be looking at and studying. But it's not the vision for the internal energy market is of single buyers. Certainly not single buyers at a national level or at a European level. Without preventing individual companies from, within competition law, exercising their commercial strategies. And then the second question of transparency, and you brought this question up in relation to transparency, and I want to go back to something I mentioned in my presentation as well, and I think something we'll have to have a slide about, just to explain how this works, because transparency exists on different planes and different levels and towards different people. And I think you can start off in splitting up the transparency between the IGA type transparency and the sort of transparency towards the market, the more general transparency. We already have rules about transparency towards the market in terms of remit, something that's quite dear to my heart, where we say where information about prices and what has been done is being made public. And that needs to be and continues to need to be enforced. On the second level, and this is something where we've made clear commitments in the Energy Union strategy, is the availability of information about the market. Information that will help in general both participants to make their judgments, but also assist the Commission or Member States to develop their policies and strategies, which is improving and bringing together the information, the data, the understanding, the knowledge that's there, and bringing that together. And that is something, again, that we're working on here. And that's very important. That links into the sense of the IGAs being transparent towards governments in terms of helping the Commission and that ensure that the strategies that are being developed make sense. And you have the other side, you have the commercial transparency that's associated with those IGAs, ensuring that there are not cross-references or clauses that the IGAs and the commercial contracts in effect form one package and are negotiated largely as one package and therefore have to be assessed and analysed together. And that's where I made my comment earlier. Of course those commercial terms can be kept confidential, which is different from the confidentiality or the general market transparency that's required under, for example, REMIT or other market governance frameworks.
Georg.
I would like to come back to the point of demand aggregation, and I'd like to state that there are essentially two reasons for doing demand aggregation. And the first reason that you would like to do a demand aggregation for is essentially the the rent sharing argument. So just take the example of Russia. Russia produces gas very cheaply. Europe pays a lot of money for gas, and then there's a huge rent to be made from bringing the cheap gas to Europe. And then the hope is that if all the European consumers were pooled together, we are able to get the gas at a slightly lower price, so we get larger share of this rent. That's one argument, and it does not work if one single company stays outside of the whole thing, because it then would conclude another deal with Gazprom that is more favorable for Gazprom. So it will not work in a voluntary way. And I personally, as an economist, don't think it's a good idea. The second reason why you would like to do demand aggregation is fighting against price discrimination. The current strategy of Gazprom in the European market is sell the gas cheaply where there's competition and sell the gas very expensive where there's no competition. Every commercial company is trying to do the same thing. But obviously it's not good for the European consumers in those countries that are paying high prices. And now, especially in Poland and Slovakia and other countries, they would like to get rid of this price discrimination, to see one single European price, which from their perspective would be lower. Again, in a voluntary way, which is prescribed in the document, it's not going to work, because why should German companies join such a scheme? Because it would mean higher prices for them, because the average price will be somewhere between the German and the Polish price. So therefore, I think the voluntary demand aggregation thing that has been described in the document is not going to deliver anything.
Jean-Michel.
What I think has no interest, because I know that I was wrong 2 years ago. I know that I will be wrong in 2 years' time, so it has absolutely no interest.
You're still young.
However, what I say has an interest, which is I know that I was wrong, I know that I am wrong, but I do not know where, why. So that's the only thing I have to say.
I know we've dwelt on gas for way too long now. I'd like to just shift things a bit to where we're going in the electricity markets. And I'd just like to sort of throw out this broad buzzword of convergence out there in terms of the network codes, in terms of the tariffs and the taxation. And just sort of see to what extent from what you've seen of the energy union, the money available for infrastructure, the use of the Juncker package, how much of this is going to change the way that the electricity market works. Sami, would you like to start on that?
No.
No. Yeah, Jean-Arnold.
I was not following.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Well, thank you very much. In the field of electricity, I think that what is really happening in this domain is what I said as a starting point is look at the demand side rather than the supply side. So the revolution in the field of electricity is coming from the demand. And we have worked, and the utilities have worked on the assumption that electricity demand would go up 1 to 2% per year. And that was in 2007, what was Prime's forecast and things like that. The reality is that since 2005, the electricity demand is decreasing.
Huh.
So this explains a lot of over-investments which have been done by the utilities and which they have to pay for today. So I think that, maybe they have not believed in the energy efficiency, they have not believed in the impact of more decentralized generation and so on. So I think that we need to understand what's happening in the electricity sector. And we see clearly that the relationship and the pattern or the paradigm has changed. I think Gérard Mestralet said it very clearly last year by saying the aim now is not to sell anymore more kilowatt hours to the consumer, it is to offer a service of a different nature, which is satisfying the consumers. And at the same time, you see the information technologies companies, Google and type of company coming into the energy sector like they come in other sectors where there is a lot of waste of resources. So look at the waste of energy every day in your home, on the road and everywhere. So this is being tackled. And the question, if you are speaking about the market design or something like that, or the security of supply of electricity, look at what's happening there. So in other words, you need to empower the consumers, I think, because this is the way probably to go towards another system which will be based on more efficient use of electricity. I replaced all the lights in my living room recently, and I replaced 200 watts by 10, so with a LED light. So if you may just 5% of consumption where you had 100% before, look at the change. Lightning is 15% of the electricity demand in the EU. So if you see all the areas where the waste of resource may be thought properly, this is changing completely. And then on the supply side, you have a big change, which is the renewables. And the renewables is variable production of electricity, which needs a backup and things like that. So we are changing the whole situation in electricity. And I think that this means that there is the need for the regulatory framework to adapt to this new situation. And while we are talking about the intraday and the balancing markets, it is really to ensure that you have a real-time situation between supply and demand with the renewables and so on. So this is a technical challenge, and this is also probably a regulatory challenge. At the same time, you need to give the right price signals to the consumer. So my wife every day asks me, well, do you know how much does it consume when I have to use this? I have no price signal. Only the last thing I got from my distributor, or no, the supplier, Electra will say, well, I'm sorry to say the distributor is asking a 10% increase in its distribution cost. So that's the kind of opacity we have at the moment. So I think it's an insult to the consumers. What's happening in the electricity, it has to stop. And so that means that there is indeed a number of things to be done. And if it is not done by the energy sector itself, it will come from outside the energy sector. And I think it's very important. So, but I'm encouraged by some utilities now seeing that and taking action by looking at the consumer as really somebody who is deserving a proper service and empowerment. Even if this empowerment is done by a third party, an aggregator or whatever, but I think there must be change there, and I think that all what should be done by the EU is to enable these changes to happen. And of course, I know that there will be the tendency for a number of players to hijack the situation and to invoke data protection or other things to say it is not possible. So we have to watch at the evolution. I do not make any forecast on what will happen tomorrow, but I think we are in a deep electricity revolution which has to be accompanied properly.
And you also expect that there'll be pressures from outside the electricity companies themselves. They'll be changing the way they operate.
It's already taking place. So we speak in our report on digital energy. Exactly. I think that's the merge of the energy sector and the information technology sector, not the merge, but the cooperation between these two sectors to make really, to accompany these changes is very necessary. And I don't know. Well, the energy sector usually has been bound by its paradigm, which is a very vertically organized system from the generation to the consumer, through the transport and the distribution system. So all this is probably changing. In addition, consumers also becoming prosumers, so they're also producing. So you have really a lot of change which have to be properly accompanied by the regulatory framework. So
Jean-Michel?
Yeah. While in gas, I do not manage understanding. I do not manage the analysis of the uncertainties, because we have a big volume risk and big price risk. But gas is gas. This is not going to change. In the power sector, we do not have any more a power sector. We even do not have any more an energy system. We have power sectors and energy systems. We do not know which one will dominate, how they will live together if they do. We do not know. And we see that companies are taking positions. We have, let's say, progressive companies, E.ON a few months ago, Enel a few days ago. They are saying, okay, bye-bye the old world, the old world will never come back. We have companies doing quite the opposite, while not saying it, like EDF in France. It's pretty clear that they think the old world is not dead and will never die. It's not only utilities, it's also governments and regulatory makers, but I won't discuss it. And now I will come to the grids. But I'm sorry to say that within the grid industry, you have exactly the same discussions and positioning, because we have infrastructure package, PCI, etc. But where will be the demand for grids? At the transportation level or at the distribution level? If it is at the transportation level, will it be country by country, which is existing TSO by existing TSO, or at regional level on supergrids? We do not know, while we are saying that they will put hundreds of billions in grids. But where? What grids? And already they have this in mind, all of them. They even big players in the transmission industry are really afraid of building white elephants, and after that to be blamed for. And I did miss the last thing I had to say, but it does not matter. And the last thing I have to say is from yesterday, fantastic discussion with a big guy from a transmission business, telling me, okay, Jean-Michel, but you did miss only one point with your furry of customer-centric approach, etc. You did miss only that European politics will never allow differentiation of tariff for consumers, will never let them go to real-time pricing, because it's the last power that governments have everywhere, including in UK. It's to block tariffs and to administratively move prices. And if you do not get fundamentally new type of tariff setting for consumers, you won't get your demand consumer thing. And so us, the grids, we can quietly decide what will be the future. The only thing we do not know if it will be distribution or transmission, and transmission country or transmission region. But we know that it will never be consumers driven.
Thank you. Tadhg O'Brien, I don't know what your format as well is, Jean-Michel, whether you'd like to do 10 minutes of questions on these topics from the audience as well.
Yes.
Yes, should we do that? Yes. And would you like to, Tadhg O'Brien, would you like to just finish off for a few words on this, and then we'll throw open the floor to everyone.
I just wanted to say that I think, it's not that the new deal for energy consumers that's discussed in the Energy Union strategy is a very real thing, and it's building on making use of new technologies that are coming. And I put it another way, which is we know we're going to need them. So there's a question of how we're going to deliver this flexibility, but we know we need the flexibility that consumers and demand side can deliver. We also know that it shouldn't be something that's burdening consumers. That's certainly not the answer. And the question then becomes is, what are the steps that in terms of very detailed issues around how the organisation of distribution system operators and what information they share and provide, that becomes very important. And how do we ensure that companies actually deliver this and that we are not blocked in other ways? but that it is and will be critical, and that another point that's, as Jean-Michel mentioned as well, that will be critical is that we ensure that this also keeps in mind the wider question of vulnerable consumers and how that's addressed. But they are very related but still distinct issues, and that the question of treatment of vulnerable consumers shouldn't block the development of, for what, let's hope of it, most of us are not, at the end of the day, vulnerable consumers.
I noticed there were two questions, actually. Well, there are more now. But two sort of immediate ones, or three in that corner over there. Yes,
Okay.
but you go first.
I'm Johannes Kindler. I'm a former regulator, and I have dealt almost my whole life with energy policy, partially a part of my life also with monetary policy. And the strategic question I would like to ask is, why the hell did you switch so quickly to this new proposals on a European Energy Union at a time when you are let's say still in the middle of the achievement of the single market? You in the European energy single market we have achieved the bulk of the regulation, and we have made a lot of progress. I'm happy about that. But what have we done? What have we really done to realize it? Where are the investment? We have never done an assessment of the third package, of its success so far, and so on. So what is the state of play? We have established a new vision without enough visibility. And I don't know if we are flying in a full or in a black or in an empty box, but we are flying in a black box, into a black box. And the idea of a union, it needs huge transfer. It needs more interdependence and so on. The energy union is at least as risky as a monetary union. That's why I mentioned my former activities, and it needs to be prepared more carefully. Thank you.
Any volunteers to go first?
If I may.
Yeah.
First of all, that we have had no assessment of how we are proceeding with the internal energy market, I think is wrong. We've got a series of communications, which are reports on the development of the internal energy market, which, strange enough, really actually do make for some interesting and good reading. They're not badly written, and not even just the parts that I wrote, but other people. They have some very interesting information on the member states and the annexes. I think it's their packages, and I'm sure you have read them, Johannes. But I think if it's worth going through, and maybe not just picking out the German file of the country report, but pick some of the other ones, and you'll begin to see. I think as well, if you read those and read them consistently, and the developments and and the understanding, you'll begin to see why the need for an energy union was felt. I think that's another important. This isn't just why President Juncker, when he was developing his political priorities, felt energy union was something to be done. Now, maybe he did read them all, but I suspect he got edited highlights. But why were the edited highlights? He said, no, actually, this is something that you can make a centerpiece of your political campaign, and you can make a centerpiece of your mandate as President of the Commission. And then, having done that, why he made it central to his reorganization of the Commission, creating a Vice President for Energy Union, to see this. And it builds, and I think we should remember this, one of the clear dimensions is the internal energy market. One of the things that's driving this, for example, is the fact that we have studies that show there are savings of the order of 15 to 40 billion per year in the electricity sector alone from moving to an internal energy market. This is money that captures the attention of heads of state and government, as we saw yesterday.
Can we just try and collect a few questions maybe first? Should we just have a couple of questions and then deal with them?
Yeah, I'm José Luis Mata. I work for REE in Spain. I would like to ask the panel if this energy union is really opening the door to a fourth package, and if so, what could be the content of it? Thank you.
And then just behind you, Dafydd.
Hello, David Abiyago from Argus. Question for the Commission, maybe Jean-Arnold, you could answer as well. It's I mean, procedural, just on the IGAs and the new legislation or updating or revising of the existing legislation. When could that happen? Because the Council said swiftly, I think that's the word in the text. And for Jean-Arnold, do you believe it can be so swift? You know, because it's co-decision, right?
And can we just take the gentleman at the back as well there?
William Daasler, University of Leuven in Belgium. I'll try to be quick. No, I do agree with the first part of Jean-Arnaud's comments. I have a huge admiration for Europe and for the Commission. I think part of the problem lies with the member states. So I won't blame too much the people in the Commission. However, although my message might sound a little bit that the glass is half empty, I will turn it around and make it half full. I do not agree at all with what Jean-Arnold said, that we have reached a lot. No, what we managed to do is we're doing very, very well, although after 3 packages with the internal market, we're converging, we have converging pricing signals, but then we managed to screw them up. We screwed it up completely. We have no investments. It's basically broke, and that's why, indeed, and some people say that we are in a crisis here. And what is really missing there is that we forgot to do the systems thinking. Systems integration, some of you have actually mentioned it in passing, but I think that's what we haven't done. Although the Commission has been doing, or tried to do a good job with the impact analysis, but we haven't actually gone far enough. I know it's a nonlinear system, I know it's not easy to predict these things, and we can predict it, but we don't even understand these things, how they work. Now we have started talking about capacity mechanisms, which they have been doing already for 15 years in the United States. So what are we doing? We're talking about these different pillars. Yeah, but we haven't talked about the integration of the pillars. They're all interlinked, and as long as we don't do that, we won't reach anything stable in the future. Also, we have to look at the resilience of the system. We have to look also at disruptions and these things. We need to look at these things much, much more carefully in a systems integrated manner.
Okay, thank you.
Please, some comments.
Maybe we'll just collect a third question from the lady at the front here.
Thank you. I'm Lise Deguin from RTE, the French electricity TSO. I just wanted to react on a few things. What time do you want to finish? First of all, I'm very happy at the end of this debate to understand how, well, I loved the reading 5 years ago, the proposal from the Institut Delors. The only thing that I was not very happy with was the fact that it was concluded by, we want all these things and we will not be able to do that. All the 27 of us, we were 27 at that time. And then maybe we have to think to other things like coopération renforcée and so on. And that was accepting the fact that we could not go ahead all together and with solidarity. And so I'm happy that 5 years ago, all the good ideas are still there, but also the fact that we could and that we should make this energy union, which is different because it's within the treaty, within the fact that we are 28. That's the first point. The second point on cooperation, harmonization, cooperation, and so on. I think that's one of the conditions of the efficiency of this process, which is really very, very, gives enthusiasm, is the fact, Sami, and you spoke about cooperation. And then, what is cooperation? Cooperation is not something completely top-down. It's also the fact that you understand the constraints and the difficulties of everyone. What I wanted to say is that if you think to the reactions of every stakeholder, every member state, every different type of member states, east, est, big, large, small, and so, as selfishness, then you're stuck. But if you think that it is, well, okay, what can I do? Taking the fact that at the end I am still responsible, then you enter in a very constructive dialogue. And I think that this could be done, but not saying everything has to be decided in Brussels or wherever, because this doesn't go anywhere. And the last thing is that I can tell that the electricity TSOs are very, very excited about all the prospects that are in this box. That definitely is not a void box, because there are a lot of things that we have been asking for potentially, and we are excited into opening this dialogue. The only thing I would say to Tadhg is that we were a little disappointed that the transmission power network is not covered in the field solidarity, because from our point of view, it's also a very, very important tool for solidarity between citizens and countries. That's it. Sorry.
Should we go back? Should we start with the notion of the fourth package? Have we any volunteers to take us off with that? Yes? Okay, there we go.
But this is the biggest surprise of the communication. I didn't believe what I did read. I did start understanding European policy 10 years ago. William was there. 10 years ago, when we have been informal discussants for Commissioner Piebalgs. He told us repeatedly, you will never get a third package. It's politically impossible. So we will do anything to achieve the internal market with the second package. 2 years later, or maybe a second package and a half. 3 years later, allez, let's go for a third package. But remember that to get the third package, we got also the sector inquiry. So we got DG Comp shooting at everybody from RWA to Gaz de France. And then, second Barroso Commission, but third package, we have it. Well, it's done. And now a fourth package, but what are you going to put in the fourth package? Where do you want to go with the wholesale market, the retail market, the links among them, the regionalization foreseen by Jean-Arnold, and the grids? We need to be able to respond to the market, because grids are only now responding to markets. Even if they do it in a first step, they do what they foresee the market will do. So that's the biggest unknown of the existing communication. And I would be very surprised if Tadhg was able to give me any light on the content of this fourth package black box.
Can I say something?
Okay.
It's very with Jean-Arnold, we've been touring Europe 360 degrees, talking to all people from the private sector, from the public sector, European, national regulators, TSO, etc., etc. Public conference or closed meetings or even bilateral discussion, etc. What was interesting is that we had these kind of questions: will there be a fourth package, etc.? Does it really matter? And no, because fourth, fifth, seventh package, what we need is a breakthrough. I think we need to be clear about that. And regarding your comment, you know, we've been hearing it hundreds of times. We've been doing a lot of good things. We've been progressing a lot, etc. And that's true, and that's very good. But just look at the European Council conclusions of 2007. This was the mandate for this European Energy Policy Part 1. Everything has been done. Do we feel that everything is going well, that everything is very nice and we are secure, sustainable and competitive? No. So let's not wait a few years to see whether the system, as we did it from 2007, is performing. And so we have to move ahead with a breakthrough. That's
Just, I mean, so Tadhg, there are now two sort of questions for you there, really. I mean, both on that, but also on the sort of the time frame of the IGAs and the idea of some new legislation.
First of all,
I like it. It's not the first package, it's the first revolution.
there we go.
There you
You say that again? No, I wanted to say I mean, fourth package. Maybe I'm even newer to the Brussels game than Jean-Michel, and why would we call it a fourth package? I mean, what are we talking about titles here? I don't see it as a fourth package for a start. We've got an energy union strategy. Why would we say, okay, but it's actually a fourth package? It's not. There's a series of policies that are set out there in that strategy, which I think are coherent, which have generally been accepted as being coherent and representing a coherent package of ideas. It's not a fourth package. But it's changes and things that are addressed in some of the the third package legislation, but far beyond that. It touches things that didn't exist when the third package was adopted. Infrastructure regulations, issues like that. I think another point is the evolution. It's much more important to see it for what it is and not to think about it in different terms or historical terms. Okay, if you want to for yourself at home, that's fine. If it helps you understand, but that's not how the Commission is thinking about it. On the IGAs, I'm going to be shot if I'm wrong, but I think it's in the back of the document in the annex. We give 2016, we give a date for the review for the proposal from the Commission. So then it will be out of our court and into the court of the legislator.
Yes. Well, I was asked directly whether it would be done swiftly. But it's the same for the fourth package ID. So I think that what is announced in the roadmap on a number of issues is to fine-tune a number of existing regulation and directives. So the third package was a completely new legislative package. So new directive on electricity and gas with 3 regulations and the regulation on creating the ACER. So I think that what we see in this roadmap is fine-tuning a number of things. So if you want to empower the TSOs to coordinate in real time the flows of electricity at regional or European level, you need to do something in the directive on electricity and directive on gas. If you want to give some more powers to ACER, you need to adapt the regulation on ACER. But all this is not revising the whole text, it's just changing the article and so on. For the IGA, you have already the decision of 2010 or 12, where it's also, if you want an ex-ante view by the Commission, this is also amending an article. So I think that's really fine-tuning, I would say about this. So this is refining the instruments which exist. But the energy union, I think, in our view, is a new project with a single process, which is steered by the European Council, because I think in the field of energy, you cannot count on the Minister of Energy to achieve the change in the energy sector. You need to go at the upper level. And I think that's what has been done since 2007, I think, clearly. And the idea is to have a kind of mandate of the European Council to go toward the changes which will have to be negotiated at the end in details by the Ministers of Energy and the European Parliament. So, but what is the risk in the energy union idea? I think the vision, which is in page 2 of the communication, is very clear, very inspirational. Some Americans I met this morning were saying it's aspirational, which is not exactly the same. So yes, of course, there is a number of doubts, and like Johannes and William maybe. But I think that indeed it is to manage the energy transition in which we are. So we have not spoken about the energy transition, but I think we are going towards a low-carbon economy. In 2007, it was not that clear. It was going for sustainability, but it was not accepted today, I think that the framework 2030, even if it is not very ambitious, it's clearly confirming the direction in which we are going. And that is where you need to manage this energy transition. In other words, you have to adapt your instruments to achieve that, and you have to enlarge your instruments. In other words, what we say in our report is to enlarge it to really all these other policies which are accompanying policies which are very important. Innovation is very important. Education is very important. The social dialogue or the social acceptance of things, including protection of vulnerable customers, in not as an energy policy but as a social policy. Trade policy, governance, the state of energy union you didn't speak about, but which is aiming at giving to the population an indication where we are, is very important. So, and also the agency for information. So if you see the US, how they have a fantastic information about the whole energy system, including the European one, we do not have the European one. If you want to be first in renewables, you will not know when you will be first in renewable because you do not have the right tools to have that. So I think there's really the need to put all this together. And then you need to keep your red line with the energy union, because all the pieces you will have to make the energy union have to stay together. Because the risk in the council, and you know that very well, is that the council will begin to pick in the menu. And maybe it will like the dessert or one of the meal, the main meal in the menu, but it will reject others. So I think it's very important to keep the coherent approach and the vision you have in the energy union. So do your vision on page 2, which is ambitious, and I agree with Johannes, it's an ambitious thing, but it's a qualitative step forward, so it's something else. Because otherwise, why have we been stuck today? Is because of national interventions in the name of security of supply, with capacity market mechanisms and things like that, and reserve, and also because of sovereignty of the energy mix. So you need to overcome that without changing the treaty, but it's just a matter of political will. And that is, the political will is the energy union. The energy union is a political project, and I agree with you. It requires a major shift of centralization maybe, but a clever centralization. So really empowering the member states where they have to be empowered against a European framework to avoid that you are undermining completely all what has been done since 2007. That would be a pity, I think. Or we go completely backwards. But today I think we have no choice. We have to go a step further. The banking union is about that. We had a crisis, but we have a crisis in energy, no? And maybe because we are in a crisis, we are able to go that step further.
I really invite you to read this paragraph on page 2 of this thing, because everyone read once this document, just looking whether their own interest and position were there. Read it once again, the whole thing all together, how it can interact, how you can make it interact, and read this one paragraph at the end of page 2, and this is the vision of the energy union. And we come back to the bridge.
Read it.
You have to.
I read it.
You have to.
Yes. To reach our goal, the goal of a resilient energy union with an ambitious climate change policy, we have to move away from an economy driven by fossil fuels, an economy where energy is based on a centralized supply-side approach and which relies on old technologies and outdated business models. We have to empower consumers through providing them with information, choice, and through creating flexibility to manage demand as well as supply. We have to move away from a fragmented system characterized by uncoordinated national policies, market barriers, and energy-isolated areas. This is the bridge. And we spent 2 very interesting hours to discuss a lot of shortcomings that needs to be addressed. We need also to think at all the breakthrough that we need to bring in the system, which are not there yet.
As you hear from Sami, he says the same like Johannes. He says like Johannes, but it's not upgrading any existing things. Existing things, we should get rid of them. We have to break it. We have to enter into something radically new. Why? Because we need a deep decarbonization of the society, not only of the energy system. We got a big consumers' involvement, because if they are not involved, it will never work. And of course, we need big innovation, because to get consumers at the center of it, we will need a lot of innovation, and all of us, the millions or the billions of us, we will use our funds to drive the system. But this is pretty far from, let's say, the responsible attitude from tax saying, oh, force package. No, it's not a force package. We will look at this and that because we need to refine a little bit. It's totally the opposite. It is in the same document, and I am still wondering what we will do. I hope we will do a fourth package. I'm not sure we will be able to do. If we do not, we are exactly in the Californian situation in the year 2000. We are waiting for big policy decisions to be taken. We are not when they will be taken. We do not know by whom. We do not know what will come out. And we have billions of investment depending on this to know if they will make some money or be killed by the evolution of the market. And it's also the same for TSOs and DSOs. Do not dream, because their billions can be burned out in 5 years' time if the policy moves.
We've accumulated some questions on Twitter, but I'm also sort of conscious that it might be cruelty to keep you here much longer, that you might be running out of air. I mean, do we want to continue a little bit longer? What's the feeling here? 2 p.m. We'll carry on. Okay. I mean, let's take maybe one for Georg on the end. On this is from Hugo Gilles or Gilles on gas imports, and he's from you. He's from the Florence School of Regulation. Are you actually here? No. Okay. Just on whether there's a numerical level we should be talking about Russian imports, because we've mentioned the gas imports from Russia have decreased from 50 to 30%, he says, due to the implementation of the IEM. What would be a comfortable level of imports from Russia in the context of an energy union? I mean, the question is an interesting one. I mean, are we actually talking about a numerical level, or is it about something sort of strategically broader?
My answer would be a bit provocative. I would not care if we import 100% of our gas from Russia, as long as we have the ability to get the same 100% from another source anytime we need to get it. And then if the Russians are the cheapest supplier, let us get it from them. But in case of disruption, we should have a fallback option.
Sylvia Saragnana asks a question about the she says, is the energy union all about gas and infrastructures? Who will pay for it? Now, just sort of map out some of the issues we're dealing with there in terms of sort of motivating the private investors to join this project. I mean, who would like to take that one on getting the animal spirits roused for this?
Maybe.
Yeah, do you want to?
I want to say, first of all, it's not just about gas and infrastructure. I think that's clear from both our discussion today, from the document, from what the Vice President has said, from what the President Juncker has said. I think this is very clear. And if there's anybody out there who still thinks that, I would say, stop, think, look again, look even at what other people are saying about it, and not just us as the chefs of this, the cooks of this document. On the question of who will pay, it's going to be many different ways, but I think it's always a dangerous question to start to answer, because I mean, there's an old joke that the consumer always pays, but I mean, obviously you pay for things by buying them on the market. So the question is, what is meant by who will pay for this? Is she talking about which frameworks and which paths will be used to give the money to the investors and so they make their return? Because we know they're not going to do it out of the goodness of their hearts. So the question is, what tools, what frameworks we're using to achieve the ends we want, and that is, I think, part of the development of the process. But mostly, I think, and you will see it again and again, and this is where the internal energy market, and I've put the emphasis there on the word market, is the tool to achieve our ends. And that means that investors will make investments and entrepreneurs will develop business models that will deliver services to consumers who will then pay for those services.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a few to sort of whip through, really. One to Jean-Arnold Vinois. Would there be such a focus on gas security of supply solidarity if no 2004-2007 enlargement?
Well, that's an excellent question. I think that obviously the 100% dependency on gas was occurring in the new member states who joined in 2004 and later. So obviously this was a challenge because it revealed in 2009 particularly the lack of infrastructure and the lack of interconnections between the West, which was rather secure with a good diversification of supply, and the Eastern European countries. So yes, this is the gas security of supply issue came clearly as a result of the enlargement. So I think let's be clear. So, and I think in the field of electricity, we have the same divide by lack of interconnection between West and East. So that is where there is still some work to be done. So yes, but I don't. Well, on the 100% supplier, I want to give an example of that. Finland is 100% dependent on Russian gas. And they are meeting the N-1 infrastructure standard according to the regulation on security of gas supply of 2010 by being able to cope with a disruption of 100% by demand management and by recourse to alternatives fuel. So this is the only case I know. Liz, you know, you are smiling. We have not checked the ability of Finland to cope with 100% disruption, but I would not go for that. I've always seen that Germany is limiting 30% is the type of ceiling they have for one supplier, and particularly the one we all have in mind. So I think yes, and the Spaniards have also regulated that. So at the time they were very dependent on Algeria, and they have reduced this dependency, and they have also by law, so much, 60%? 50%. So, so I think in any case, diversification is not new. Mr. Churchill was already saying that long ago. So it is the right policy.
Sami, you have a specific security of supply question as well, just for you. And this is from Agata Woskot-Strachota. And she says, I agree with SOS regulation, but it was also to answer concrete needs. What common concrete needs now to answer?
That's a good question that I don't understand. No, what is interesting is that you, as a journalist, your question was, aren't we talking too much? Is it not too much centered on gas, this strategy, and then all the questions that we get are about gas? Can you ask the tweeters why?
Not before lunchtime.
You can say hello to
Okay. And Tadhg has a splendidly precise Brussels question. IGAs, is there more support between member states than in 2011? Commission proposal for decision 994/2012.
Well, okay, this is where you have to give
The
such
IGAs,
a precise question.
yes.
I think you can only give an obfuscatory answer and say that there was clearly support for the existing decision, given that it was agreed to, and that the Commission will develop its proposal over the course of the next year to set out in 2016. I think we will propose something that we consider has a good chance of being accepted, but it's not that we're simply going around saying we're going to concede everybody's smallest desire at the time. But actually, and to be much more precise, I do think there is going to be, and there is appetite for change here, and I do think that member states recognise that this is not a power grab, or this is not bureaucracy for its own sake by the Commission. This is, as I said in my presentation, two-stranded. It's about ensuring that we are not, that a policy of divide and conquer is not used against us, or rather is not successfully used against us. And it's about not leaving member states alone who need to negotiate against powerful commercial / governmental interests on the other side.
Do we have, 2 minutes left. Is there one final, has anybody got a burning question left? Or should we let everybody retire to lunch? You'd like to conclude? There you go. Yes. Yeah.
If it is the end of the end of the end, I will conclude. I will conclude.
Song.
Next time, I need to prepare to sing. It's not that's spontaneous. So I need to conclude. Well, I will conclude. I'm very happy having Tadhg opening the session and keeping with us, because we need to understand the way Commission sees it, enters into it, foresees development. And I did like he's asked you two way to say, but Jean-Michel, it's not a EC proposal anymore, because the Council has been clear yesterday. It's a common vision. Fair enough. Second thing, as I am an old or a still mature professor, I like debates where I learn something, and debates where there is things I cannot immediately understand and I have to work on it. It has been the case for several hours, so it's really fantastic for me. So I would like to thank Christian for his very wide open administration of the debate. My co-panelists, because most of the time I've been more interested into listening them than thinking about myself and my school. Two big things, all the people joining us online, and if I have to give the most heartful, friendly, enthusiastic thanks there to the online followers, I strongly believe that it's a key characteristic on the 21st century. Online, you have the same rights and the same sharing that people being here in the room. It's very key. And I have to apologize the fact that we haven't been able at Florence School to make it work immediately. We are a very young team. I am by far the oldest. We are an old, young team between 26 36. They do the best they can to have innovative tools and to make it work. From time to time, we have difficulty. We learn through difficulties. That's life. And we are sure that we are not going to forget energy unions for the two coming years. And if I remember correct, Florence School is offering you a lunch, a drink, everything. Thanks to everybody, and particularly online audience.